So in my first call, right out of seminary, newly minted pastor in Virginia, one of my responsibilities with youth ministry. And I soon discovered, once I got there, that I had two in youth ministry that did not get along. I mean, that's kind of putting it mildly. They couldn't hardly be in the same room together. They would, one would look at the other one funny, and that would set off a whole series of explosions. There wasn't a week that went by that I didn't get some kind of a message or a phone call or ask for a meeting where one was complaining about the other and wanting, me to do something about it. And of course, as this newly minted pastor, I just wanted to fix things. So the more I tried to do a quick fix, the worse it got. These were adult leaders, actually, in my youth ministry. Yeah, and I hadn't recruited them, but they were my leaders, and I needed them to do stuff. And I needed them to set a good example for, the other people on the team, but also for the youth themselves. I mean, when I was around them and hearing them bicker, I just longed for the even emotional state of most teenagers, compared to them. Yeah. So I was pretty frustrated and didn't really know what to do, and nothing what I was doing was working with these two adult leaders in youth ministry. And so I went to my senior pastor, and I told him the long story. He already knew. He wasn't blind to it. And after I had finished, I was expecting him to fix it. And he said to me, first he laughed, and he said, there's a reason we're called children of God. I was like, yeah. And he goes, hey, Mark, isn't it great you have two adults so excited and passionate about youth ministry? And I was like, yeah, I guess. But he was right. It was they didn't get along, and they never quite did, saw eye to eye. But he was helping me see it from a different perspective, wasn't he? He was helping me reframe my perspective and how I saw it. It wasn't just two individuals that were always at odds. It was two adult leaders that were so very passionate about youth ministry, and that's what was behind it, and so willing to serve. He really did help me reframe my perspective. That's what we're talking about this Sunday, is the divine reset. Last weekend, we started out in the divine reset. We started out talking about our need for reset. So Pastor Ariel and I kind of came up for this theme for us to guide our lessons during Lent, that we would recognize this need for reset. Because in this busy world, we get so busy, we think we can do it all. Sometimes we don't think we even need to take a break. But God gives us that as a gift. This time to step back and kind of rest in God, abide in Jesus. And when we do that, I think we find that our perspective shifts. I don't know if you've ever been able to go on a break from work or school or a summer vacation, and you come back maybe refreshed, but also maybe with a different perspective with how you were seeing things. It took my old senior pastor saying that to me about being children of God, and it's great to be passionate about youth ministry, for me to look at things differently. And sometimes when we rest in God, that's what it takes to reframe our perspective. Reframing is actually a technique used in therapy. Sometimes we get to a place where we're only seeing the world as either or. Black and white thinking, or we catastrophize things, or we think we can read other people's mind, so we make a lot of assumptions about things, and that shapes our perspective. But sometimes reframing can help us take a step back, challenge those assumptions, and then let a wiser voice speak into that. And certainly God does that with us. As we rest in God, as we abide in Jesus, as we take a step back and rest as God has designed us for, God changes our perspective as well. We read from Romans, from Paul's letter to the Romans, and we heard that therefore his faith was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now, who Paul is talking about is someone whose perspective was changed. So Paul is talking about Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis. And so, as you may know, in the story of Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis, they go by Abram and Sarai. at that point, before God has changed their name and their perspective, and they're very old. And they think that certain things in life, certain seasons of life, has kind of passed them by. And for them, one of the things they think, Abraham and Sarah, they think is passed them by is the gift of children. They think that is no longer in the realm of possibilities. It's no longer in their vision because they're so very old. But God comes to Abraham and Sarah and gives them a new perspective, something that only God can do. Only God can do. Only God can give them this gift. And tells Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis that not only are you going to have a child, but through you, through your children and your children's children and your children's children, you are going to have descendants as numerous as the stars, and they're not just for you. They're for the world. You will be blessed to be a blessing in so many ways. And this comes to Abraham and Sarah in their old age. They thought their life was going one way. God changed their mind, adjusted their perspective as only God can do, and gives it to them as a gift. The words that Paul uses is that Abraham and Sarah believed, they trusted, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. That means God gave him this righteousness, this right relationship as a gift. He didn't earn it. He wasn't special in any way till God made Abraham and Sarah special, because God was in their life. God could change their perspective in such a way that they could be a blessing to others. And Paul names that for us all, that our faith is given to us. Our right relationship with God is given to us as a gift, reckoned to us as righteousness. Martin Luther would use the term, it always kind of sticks with me, he uses the term alien righteousness. Ooh, aliens. Alien righteousness. That just means that it comes from beyond us. We didn't earn it. We're not working our way into God's goodness. We can't change our perspective that way. But God gives it to us as a gift. God gives us this relationship as a gift. And God works through us, through this gift, then to be a blessing to others, then to live in a right way towards others. Peter wasn't sure about that, though, in today's gospel. Today's gospel, Peter is told, along with the disciples and the crowd, for those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Here's where this falls in kind of the gospel story. So, a while back, I preached about Jesus asking the disciples, who do people say that I am? And they had all these answers, John the Baptizer and Elijah, one of the prophets. And then Jesus says, well, who do you? So you've been around me a little bit. Who do you say that I am? And Peter pipes up, says, well, you're the Messiah. You're the Messiah. Well, this is right after that. Right after that, Peter got the correct answer. And then Jesus starts to explain a much different perspective than Peter and maybe the other disciples and the other people of Jesus' day had in mind about what Messiah means. Like I said weeks ago, that Messiah in their mind might be this great military leader, like David, who would march in with an army to Jerusalem, throw out the Romans, and put a Jewish ruler on the throne of the temple again. But that's not what Jesus was talking about. Whenever they name him as a Messiah, he says, yes, and the Messiah is going to be rejected by all the religious leaders, all the political leaders. He can be rejected and mocked and scorned and spit upon and crucified and died. That's not what Peter had in mind. That's not the vision of life that Peter has in mind. That's not what he's hanging on to. Jesus says those who want to save their life, hold on too tight to their view, their perspective, well, they'll lose that because that's temporary. We came up with that on our own. But those who are shaped by the cross, let the cross shape our perspective, well, we'll find a life abundant. When Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis are promised children. There's so much abundance in what they're promised. They're promised land and children as numerous as the stars. And that's what Jesus promises us, but just not in the way we were initially visioning. Jesus reframes our perspective. A couple weeks ago, I talked about climbing Long's Peak in the Rocky Mountain National Park. And the second time I went up there, I had that 360 view I talked about. We call that sometimes a God's eye view. A God's eye view. Whether you're on top of a mountain or I asked you all to stand on top of your pews and chairs and say, "Oh, Captain, my captain," and look around, you'd be looking around this room from a different perspective. Jesus reframes our perspective, how we view this world, ourselves, and others through the cross. Jesus, through the cross, opens himself up to all. Just a week ago, right here in this place, we have preschool chapel every week. In a preschool chapel, I talked about love of neighbor, and I shared the story of the Good Samaritan, the Spark Bible. You can see Spark Bibles there right before you. If you ever get bored in my sermon, just flip through that Spark Bible. You'll learn a lot. But shared that story, and love of neighbor is how the cross shapes our perspective. Jesus gave himself away for the sake of the world. And his righteousness comes through us so that we can give of our time and talent and possessions for the sake of the world. Here in this place, a little while back, we hosted something called the Four Chaplains. And the Four Chaplains, I'd never heard of it till they asked for us to host it, and we were happy to host it. But basically, the Four Chaplains is an opportunity as a community to come together and commemorate the story that happened during World War II. Apparently, during World War II, there was a big ship transport called the Dorchester, and it was on its way, I believe, to Greenland. Don't quote me on that, but it was torpedoed by a German sub, and it was sinking. And as they were going down, apparently they were having trouble finding life preservers and things like that. But then 4 chaplains kind of stepped forward that were on that transport. And they used their time as the ship was going down to help those soldiers, those 900 folks that were being transported into lifeboats. And their final act was to give away their life preservers. And they sang hymns and spiritual songs as the ship went down. Now, we commemorated that because of their great act of sacrifice. But we also use it as an opportunity, apparently this organization, to honor people in the community. And so they honored somebody who started the Camp Hope, which is not the day camp, but there's a Camp Hope, which is for folks that have suffered from PTSD in military service, and they can be there for a little while. It's up by the racetrack near where I live. And they can be there for a while, they can find their footing, and then they can come and have a fruitful life in society. But they get to be there as a place of rest following experiencing PTSD. Now, the guy we recognize kind of started that Camp Hope. And we recognize him for what he did with his time and talent and treasure. There's 4 chaplains, the guy that started Camp Hope. They're using what God has given them, and they're letting their life be shaped, their perspective be shaped by the cross, so they can share that for the good of others. I know sometimes I hang on to what I have so tightly. My perspectives even, my self-serving perspectives. I hang on to it so tightly. Jesus is asking us to open ourselves up, to let our lives be shaped by the cross, to open ourselves up to the life that God has in store for us. Amen.